Having a look at the state of this, there's a few spots of corrosion on that arm. Yeah, here too. No special reason for them to be there apart from the fact we know it's had some liquid tips into the top of this camera. I'm just going to mark around here so I know where that arm comes back to, because the position of this arm can be shifted left or right, and it's good to have it return to the rest position. Because if you start in the wrong place, it's awkward. Now, right tools for the job. This little tool here. Just undo that pinhead screw, remove that little pin from the spring, pop that to one side, remove this screw completely. Once it's loose, it's easy to get it apart. Now this is a little bit interesting. Okay, there's no lubrication here. Normally I'm used to seeing grease and stuff there. It's absolutely dry. I mean, someone's had a part to clean it. I don't know if they used any lubrication at all, but I'm not used to seeing it quite in that state. I'm going to mark the position of this bush relative to that arm. It's supposed to be circular, but with the slot in it, it acts a little bit like an eccentric. So if it's in the wrong position, then the adjustments will be, you'll need more adjustments than you otherwise would to get things lined up. And you want it all working in your favour. Don't want to be doing any more hard work than you absolutely have to. Yeah, you can see that screw's loose, and there's certainly corrosion on that little plate there. Its mate's not loose. Yeah, it's suffered from whatever went in there. The two screws here hold the prism on the end of the body, and the position of the prism is adjusted to adjust the vertical alignment. That prism appears to be in good order, just a little bit dirty. Right, so some of these other components. The semi-silvered mirror is this one in here, runs across at an angle. The rear surface is the silvered surface. If you touch it, you will wipe the silver off it, and it will no longer work. Just remove that. Here's one of our silvered frame line mirrors. That's the rearmost one. That looks in very good order. I'll remove the retainer from the front set. That's this whole group here. And then this is locked in place with a touch of lacquer top and bottom. So I need to use some acetone on that to soften that lacquer so I can pull these components out without breaking things, because it's certainly possible to break things. And replacement parts for 60-year-old cameras or 65-year-old cameras are not particularly easy to find. Often they can only come from organ donors. Now there are 4 components in the front here. There's that mask you can see on the outside. It's got our frame lines on it. That's coming loose, that's good. That's like celluloid or something. You can clean that with acetone, that won't fall to bits. This piece, we've got 3 pieces here. Section with the mirrored frame lines on it. I've got to clean all that lacquer off that needs to be sparkling. Here we have a metal mask and the front component. Now all of that is covered in lacquer, and I've got to clean those 3 carefully with acetone and get them all sparkly clean. I'll start with that front lens. Of course the top and bottom edge is where the acetone was, the lacquer was, and they're likely to be the dirtiest. But it's very hard to get every last smear of lacquer off the glass. And there will be other dirt on here too, of course, just the general filth that the glass has gathered up over time. But this is solid glass, there's not much to damage on it. It's not a particularly vulnerable component, and you can be fairly robust with your cleaning methods. And as I'm wiping this with acetone, I'm watching the cotton bud to see if it's showing signs of colour, like it's picking up anything off the glass, which would give me an indication that there is still lacquer on the glass. That appears very clean. I'll clean that once with glass cleaner before that goes back in. Let's pop that over there out of the way. Right, the pieces of glass with the mirrored surfaces. The front one has probably got lacquer on it, so I've got to clean that carefully. Now the mirror, the silver mirrored lines on these glasses is pretty robust. If it's disappeared, and they often have disappeared, it's probably been etched away by atmospheric contaminants more than anything else. It stands up quite well to cleaning like this. But if it's already damaged, it's certainly not going to get better by cleaning it. I'm just checking the state of this, and there's obviously marks in the corner. That's probably lacquer. I'm going to get all that out so that that glass is sparkly and clear. Apart from its only useful job is to suspend that mirror in space so that things reflect in the right spot. The glass in the centre is just glass, and it needs to be clear because you're trying to see through it. It's not doing any other clever image formation. It's just trying to pretend it's not really there, really. It's got to be as clean as glass can be. This piece, of course, had no lacquer on it because there's no lacquer holding that piece in place. That looks fine. So I've got the body here, and I'm looking at the state of the semi-silvered mirror. Now the front surface, the surface that faces the front of the camera, is plain glass. If it's particularly dirty, I'd normally clean that piece first before I clean the whole thing in the ultrasonic cleaner, so that I'm only having to clean just enough to make sure that the inside surface is clean. The inside surface is incredibly delicate, and it will lose its silvering if you look at it the wrong way. This surface at the front is just glass. It's not particularly delicate, and I'm just making sure I remove any major contaminants so that I don't have to do any hard work. Right, that piece there, that body can now go away, and I'll clean that in the ultrasonic cleaner. And how I do that is I put this into a small drinking glass with a drop of dishwashing detergent and fairly hot warm water, and suspend that in the ultrasonic cleaner. I give it 3 minutes and no longer. Pull it out, flush it under the tap, and then dry it carefully with a blower and a hair dryer to get everything nice and dry again. And you use a blower and a hair dryer because you don't want droplets forming on the glass and then drying on the glass. You end up with like coffee rings around them. If you keep the blower there and you keep blowing away any droplets, then the dryer will dry the glass. It'll come out nice and sparkly, which is what we want. Right, that's back from cleaning. And I can carry on with the rest of the assembly. I have the rearmost or eyepiece lens cleaned there, ready to go on. That's held in with this mask at the back and one small screw. The silver frame lines pieces, the larger frame goes towards the back. The silvered lines must face towards the front of the camera. The silvered lines are only on one face of the glass. It must be towards the front of the camera, not towards the back. I'll slide that into position. Now, that glass lens, just blow that dust off there. Just checking the state of that, and that looks clean. Now the metal frame looks quite dirty. I'm going to clean that. I'll get that frame in place. It goes on that front lens. It goes over the concave surface. The plane surface is at the front. And I'm going to slide that into position. The silvered mirror, the silvered mirrored frame lines on it, the smaller of the silvered rectangle frame lines, that goes in here behind this front lens arrangement. The silvered lines face to the rear of the camera. So the surface with the silvered lines on faces the rear of the camera, not the front of the camera. I'll put that frame in place, that frame line place. It should be the dull grey side to the front. There are two marks, vertical marks or horizontal marks in the top left hand top corners there. They should be in the top corners, not the bottom corners. If you get it around the wrong way, your marks won't look right. Okay, so those pieces are all in place. Now I'm just looking out the window to make sure that's nice and clear and that my frame lines show correctly, and they do. That's good. That piece, that's held in with that bracket. Now that bracket was somewhat dirty and marked looking. I'm going to clean that now. There's certainly some corrosion on there. That's not going to cause a problem. It's just a leftover from that whatever had been tipped on the top of this camera. I'll just remove it so I don't want lumps and bumps on there. And that's held in place with a single screw. That looks better. The prism. There's a bit of dirt on the surfaces. There's three faces of the prism. The two you can see here, and of course the one inside down that hole. All three of them need to be cleaned. Usually the outside ones, of course, are the ones that are most likely to be dirty. Just clean these with normal glass cleaner. This prism is held into this little bracket with some lacquer, and if you use acetone or some other clever solvent to clean that prism, you'll end up in grief because it'll melt that lacquer, the prism won't be firmly held there, and you won't like the result. That looks good. Just make sure there's no threads of cotton in there. Pop that into position. There are two screws that go in here and hold that in position, and they also provide you with your vertical alignment of your rangefinder images. We'll get those two screws in place. Get that very roughly squared up. That'll do. And that leaves us with our moving arm. Now the moving arm has a little lens on it too. So I'm going to clean that. That's a nice solid piece of glass, nothing delicate about it. Cleans easily. And the arm itself, I need to make sure that that's clean. Normally you have to clean away all the old oil and grease and congealed junk. In this case there's not much of that in evidence. A little bit of dirt, but hardly any. I want all those surfaces cleaned. Likewise, that little bronze bush, the wavy washer, and that screw. Now I've got to get that arm in place, and getting that arm in place is only a minor nuisance. So, assembling this. Right. So, a wipe of molybdenum paste around the inside where the bronze bush will go. A wipe on that arm surface there where it's going to contact the body of the rangefinder. That bronze bush, I've got a scratch mark on there so I know where it came from, which tells me which side up it came from and the position of that bush relative to the arm. There it is. Here. Now that arm is held in, and the screws runs into this bush. This bush fits inside the rangefinder and it runs in that slot. So I've got to get that positioned in that slot, which is not too difficult. And here it's very difficult to show this because we're a bit close to the camera. I'll zoom out a bit and it might be happier about it. That's better. Here I've got this supported on the end of a screwdriver just so that there's a hole in the top. So I'm supporting that bush from underneath so that it stays where it's put. I can put the arm in place like that. Can you see that? Yeah, you can still see that. a wipe of molybdenum paste around that bush at the top there, where that wavy washer is going to go. And then our screw fits down the top there, screws into the bush. You can run that in with a pair of tweezers. That's it. Back to normal view. And you can probably see the scribe line there, where that arm's not as far back as it was previously. So I'll slacken that screw off slightly, move my arm forward to somewhere about there, nip that up, and here's the spring, the pin that has to go through the spring. Pull that spring back into position like that, make sure it's centered on the pin, and the arm should move back into position nicely. I'll just check by looking out the window to see how that looks. Well, my moving image is very, very high, which tells me that I need to loosen the front screw and tighten the rear screw. It's still high. Loosen the front screw, tighten the rear screw, and you'll see that I'm only moving these a very small amount, perhaps 1/10 of a turn, something like that at a time. It's coming in closer. They are pretty much correctly aligned vertically, but horizontally I'm a mile away. Now, one of the possibilities is this front lens here is a lens, and that will affect the position of your images. I'm just going to push that whole lens set across. It's not locked in place, of course, because there's no lacquer there. And I'll check and see if we've come closer to alignment. No, we're not. We're the other way. I'll push it the other way and see if that's the correct direction. No, it was the way I wanted to be the first time. The reason it's out is probably I've got the front lens group swapped over the other way. Just slacken that screw off. Push that whole group across. See where we are. Well, that's it, that's bang on. I'll just tighten those two screws up. Check again. That looks absolutely perfect. Alright, so my horizontal alignment's right on the money. I'm just going to put a spot of lacquer here and here, which will lock the position of that front lens in to make sure it doesn't drift. If it drifts, of course, your horizontal alignment would be out, and it would drift if the camera had been dropped, for example. I'll just take a drop of lacquer. Just apply that to the top and the bottom, just into that little slot there. Hopefully that'll drop down as far as the lens and lock everything in place. Right, so our rangefinder's good to go. That's ready to go back in the camera, which means now I'm just about ready to reassemble the body. So I need my parts back from the ultrasonic cleaner. Well, here are the mechanical components all back from the ultrasonic cleaner. Everything should be sparkly and clean and ready to be assembled now. So I will start on the process of putting the camera back together.